In a small American town, Charlotte Charlie Brooks, a compassionate animal lover, loses her job after helping a stray dog named Ghost. This encounter introduces her to Ethan Carter, who invites her to join a local animal rescue organization. As Charlie immerses herself in her new role, she uncovers a sinister animal trafficking operation led by Darren Colt. With her team's help, Charlie gathers evidence to expose Colt, leading to a tense confrontation at an abandoned warehouse. Despite the danger, Charlie's bravery and determination result in Colt's arrest and the rescue of numerous abused animals. Inspired by their victory, Charlie and her team expand their mission, creating a regional network to combat animal cruelty and bring hope to more animals in need. This story showcases the power of compassion, courage, and teamwork in fighting injustice and making a real difference in the world. What did you think about Charlie's journey and her fight against injustice? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Are you watching from the United States, Europe, or elsewhere? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to DG Story for more inspiring and exciting tales. Hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next release. Your support helps us bring more impactful stories to life.
Sky.
The quiet town of Rosewood lay nestled amidst rolling fields and dense woodlands, a slice of rural Americana untouched by the rush of urban life. At its heart stood Mason's Diner, a no-frills establishment where the smell of sizzling bacon and freshly brewed coffee greeted regulars every morning. For Charlotte Charlie Brooks, this diner wasn't just her workplace, it was the center of her modest life. Charlie, a 25-year-old with sun-kissed freckles and perpetually wind-tousled auburn hair, had grown up in Rosewood. The townsfolk knew her as the girl with a soft spot for animals, often seen coaxing stray cats out of alleys or leaving water bowls by the park bench during hot summer days. Her childhood had been punctuated by a deep bond with her first dog, Rex, a scruffy mutt who'd been her closest companion. But Rex's untimely death, after being abandoned by his previous owner, left a scar that Charlie carried into adulthood, a scar that fueled her resolve to never let another animal suffer the same fate. One chilly autumn morning, as the golden sunrise painted the town in hues of amber and rose, Charlie pushed open the diner door. She adjusted her apron, tied her hair back, and plastered on a cheerful smile that masked the weariness of her routine. Frank Mason, the gruff owner of the diner, barely glanced up from the cash register as she clocked in. "Busy morning ahead?" he muttered, his tone curt as always. Charlie grabbed a coffee pot and began weaving between the tables, refilling cups for the early risers. She had just set a plate of pancakes in front of old Mr. Hargrove when she spotted movement outside the diner window. A dog, a husky with striking blue eyes and a coat matted with dirt, sat by the curb. Its ribs were visible beneath its dull fur, and its gaze followed each plate of food with quiet desperation. Her heart clenched. Charlie had seen her fair share of stray animals around town, but this dog seemed different. It wasn't barking or causing a commotion, just sitting there as though it had accepted its fate. When the rush subsided, Charlie carried a plate of leftover scrambled eggs and toast toward the back door. She glanced over her shoulder to make sure Frank wasn't watching before stepping outside. "Hey there, buddy," she whispered, crouching low. "You hungry?" The husky's ears perked up, but it hesitated, sniffing the air cautiously. Charlie set the plate down and backed away, letting it approach at its own pace. Slowly, it crept toward the food, and when it began eating ravenously, tears pricked the corners of her eyes. "You've been through a lot, huh?" she murmured. "Don't worry, you're not alone anymore." Unbeknownst to her, Frank had been watching from the doorway, his face a mask of cold disapproval. Frank's booming voice shattered the quiet moment. "Charlie, what do you think you're doing?" Charlie whipped around, her heart racing. The husky flinched at the sound and retreated a few steps, its ears flattening against its head. Frank stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his expression a mixture of irritation and contempt. "I was just giving it some food," Charlie stammered, instinctively shielding the dog from view. Frank strode toward her, the heavy thud of his boots echoing against the pavement. "I've told you before, this is a business, not a charity. We don't feed strays. They'll keep coming back, and then what? Customers don't want to see filthy animals hanging around the diner." "It's just one plate of leftovers," Charlie argued, her voice steady despite the anger rising in her chest. "We throw away so much food every day. Why not let it go to something good?" Frank shook his head, his expression hardening. "You're not paid to question me, Charlie. You're paid to follow orders." Charlie glanced at the husky, now cowering behind a stack of crates, its soulful blue eyes locked with hers, pleading silently. Something inside her snapped. "Maybe if you had a little compassion, Frank, people wouldn't think of this place as just another cold, lifeless diner," she shot back, her voice trembling with frustration. Frank's eyes narrowed. "That's enough. Pack your things. You're done here." The words hit Charlie like a punch to the gut. "You're firing me? For feeding a dog?" "Or disobeying me and embarrassing this establishment," Frank barked, turning on his heel. "Get out, and take your bleeding heart with you." Charlie stood frozen, her apron still tied around her waist. The weight of the moment pressed down on her as customers inside began to peer through the windows, their murmurs barely audible over the pounding of her heartbeat. Tears threatened to spill, but she swallowed them back, refusing to break in front of Frank or the onlookers. She crouched back down beside the husky, her hand trembling as she stroked its matted fur. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We'll figure something out." The husky nudged her hand with its nose, as if offering comfort. Charlie smiled faintly through her tears. "You and me, buddy. We'll be all right." Just as she was about to stand, the sound of a car engine hummed from the parking lot. A sleek black SUV pulled in, its polished exterior gleaming under the morning sun. The vehicle came to a smooth stop, and out stepped a tall man in a crisp navy suit. He approached Charlie with measured strides, his gaze shifting between her and the husky. "Excuse me," he began, his voice calm yet authoritative. "Is that your dog?" Charlie blinked, unsure how to respond. "No, he's just a stray," she admitted. "I was trying to help." The man's expression softened as he crouched down, extending a hand toward the husky. "Hey there, Ghost," he said gently. The husky's ears perked up at the name, and to Charlie's astonishment, it stepped forward cautiously, nuzzling the man's hand. The man looked up at Charlie with a small smile. "I've been looking for him. This dog means the world to my sister." Charlie stared at the man, her mind racing to process what she'd just heard. "Your sister's dog," she echoed, glancing back at the husky. "Ghost," as the man had called him. The man nodded, still petting Ghost gently. "Yes. He disappeared a week ago. My sister, Emily, has been heartbroken ever since. This dog is everything to her." Charlie felt a mix of relief and sadness. She was glad Ghost had an owner who cared about him, but the thought of parting with the husky, after their brief but meaningful connection, stung unexpectedly. "I'm just glad he's safe now," she said softly, standing up and brushing the dust from her jeans. The man rose to his full height, offering her a warm smile. "I'm Ethan Carter, by the way," he said, extending a hand. "No." "Charlotte Brooks," she replied, shaking it, "but most people call me Charlie." "Charlie?" Ethan repeated, his tone thoughtful. His gaze shifted toward the diner where Frank was now watching the exchange with a scowl. "I couldn't help but overhear. It seems you've had a rough morning." Charlie let out a bitter laugh. You could say that. I just got fired for trying to help Ghost. I'm glad for... Ethan frowned, glancing at Frank before turning back to her. That's unfortunate, but it says more about him than it does about you. What you did was selfless, and that kind of compassion is rare these days. Charlie shrugged, feeling the weight of the morning settle in her chest. Compassion doesn't pay the bills, she muttered. Ethan paused, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. From it, he retrieved a business card and handed it to her. Actually, compassion is exactly what I'm looking for, he said. Charlie raised an eyebrow, examining the card. It bore the logo of a local animal rescue organization, Evergreen Rescue Sanctuary, along with Ethan's name and title as a board member. I work with Evergreen Rescue, Ethan explained. We take in animals like Ghost, ones that have been lost, abandoned, or mistreated. We're always looking for people with heart and dedication to join our team. Based on what I've seen today, you'd be a perfect fit. Charlie blinked in surprise, her thumb brushing over the embossed lettering on the card. Are you serious? She grinned. Completely, Ethan said with a small smile. Come by the sanctuary tomorrow morning. I'd love to show you around and discuss the opportunity further. Before Charlie could respond, Ghost let out a soft bark, nudging her leg as if urging her to say yes. She looked down at him, his eyes now bright with hope, and felt a spark of determination reignite within her. All right, she said, her voice steady. I'll be there. Ethan nodded, his expression one of quiet approval. I look forward to it. With that, he led Ghost to the SUV, the husky pausing briefly to look back at Charlie, his tail wagging faintly. As the car pulled away, Charlie stood in the empty parking lot, clutching the business card tightly. The morning's events had turned her life upside down, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, she whispered to herself. This is where everything changes. The next morning, Charlie found herself standing at the gates of Evergreen Rescue Sanctuary, a sprawling property on the outskirts of the neighboring city. The early sunlight bathed the open fields and modest buildings in a golden glow, and the sound of barking dogs echoed faintly in the distance. She clutched Ethan's business card in her hand, her nerves frayed but her resolve firm. You can do this, she whispered to herself, before pushing open the gate and stepping onto the gravel path. The main building was a cozy two-story structure with a rustic charm, its wooden exterior adorned with a sign that read Evergreen Rescue, a safe haven for all. Charlie approached the entrance, where a young woman with dark curly hair and a welcoming smile greeted her. Hi there, you must be Charlie, the woman said, extending a hand. I'm Sophia Martinez, the head vet here. Ethan told us you'd be stopping by. Charlie shook her hand, a tentative smile forming on her lips. That's me. Thanks for having me. Evaded. Of course. We can always use more hands around here, especially someone with your kind of heart. Sophia said warmly. Let me show you around. As they walked through the sanctuary, Charlie was struck by the sense of purpose and care that radiated from every corner. The outdoor play area buzzed with energy as dogs of all shapes and sizes romped together, tails wagging furiously. Inside the medical wing, a team of volunteers tended to cats recovering from surgery. The adoption center was bright and inviting, with families meeting potential pets for the first time. We've got about 40 animals here at the moment, Sophia explained as they passed a row of kennels. Most of them were rescued from tough situations, abandonment, abuse, neglect. Some are here temporarily, waiting for their forever homes. Others might need a bit more time to heal. Charlie stopped in front of one kennel where a small, scruffy terrier sat curled up in the corner. Its wide, wary eyes followed her every move, and its tail twitched slightly, betraying a mix of curiosity and fear. "That's Max," Sophia said softly. "He's one of our long-term residents. Came to us from a pretty bad situation. He's been here a few months now, but he's still learning to trust people." Charlie crouched down, keeping her movements slow and gentle. "Hey, Max," she murmured. The terrier's ears perked up slightly, and it took a cautious step forward before retreating again. Sophia smiled. "Looks like he's already warming up to you. That's a good sign." Before Charlie could respond, Ethan's voice called out from across the room. "Charlie, glad you made it." She turned to see Ethan approaching, his easygoing demeanor putting her at ease. "What do you think so far?" he asked, gesturing around the sanctuary. "It's amazing," Charlie said earnestly. "I've never seen anything like this before." Ethan nodded, his expression growing serious. "We're doing good work here, but it's not without challenges. We're always fighting for resources, and there's no shortage of animals in need. That's why people like you are so important." Charlie felt a surge of pride and determination. "I'd love to help in any way I can," she said. "Perfect," Ethan replied with a grin. "Let's get you started." Over the next few hours, Charlie threw herself into the work. She helped clean kennels, prepare meals, and walk the dogs. By the end of the day, her muscles ached, but her heart felt fuller than it had in years. After the doctor left, she started studying the kennel website. As the sun set over the sanctuary, she found herself sitting beside Max's kennel, a sense of peace settling over her. "This feels right," she whispered to herself. Unbeknownst to her, the peace wouldn't last long. Trouble was brewing, and Charlie was about to find herself in the fight of her life. The following weeks at Evergreen Rescue Sanctuary passed in a whirlwind of activity. Charlie quickly settled into her new role, balancing her time between caring for the animals and learning the ins and outs of the sanctuary's operations. One morning, as Charlie was cleaning out Max's kennel, Sophia entered with a clipboard in hand and a concerned look on her face. "Charlie, we need to talk," she said, her tone quiet but serious. Charlie put down the scrub brush and stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. "What's wrong?" Sophia handed her the clipboard, which held a stack of papers. "We've been noticing a pattern. Over the past month, we've had an unusually high number of reports about missing pets, mostly dogs, but some cats too, from nearby neighborhoods. These reports are concentrated around a specific area on the outskirts of Rosewood." Charlie furrowed her brow as she scanned the list of dates and locations. "You think it's connected?" Sophia nodded grimly. "It's more than a coincidence. Ethan's already flagged it to the local authorities, but they don't seem to have the resources to investigate. It's up to us to figure out what's going on." A knot of unease tightened in Charlie's stomach. "Do you think they're being stolen?" "I do," Sophia replied. "And if that's the case, there's a good chance these animals are being sold or worse." The thought made Charlie's heart sink. She had seen firsthand how much pain and fear rescued animals carried, and the idea of more being added to their ranks was unbearable. "What can I do to help?" she asked without hesitation. Saab found his voice first and managed to feign contrition. Sophia gave her a small, grateful smile. "Ethan's been digging into this and could use an extra pair of hands. Meet us in the office after your shift." Later that evening, Charlie joined Ethan and Jake in the sanctuary's small office. The walls were lined with photos of adopted pets and thank you notes from families, but the atmosphere was far from celebratory. Ethan had spread out a map on the desk, marked with red pins denoting the locations of reported pet disappearances. "Thanks for coming," Ethan said as Charlie entered. "We've got a lot to cover." Jake, the sanctuary's trainer, leaned against the desk with his arms crossed. His usual laid-back demeanor was replaced with a somber expression. "This isn't just some random thief picking up strays," he said. "There's something organized behind this." Charlie studied the map, her gaze tracing the red pins clustered around the same area Sophia had mentioned earlier. Do we know anything about who's behind it? I'm not sure. Ethan shook his head. Not yet, but we've been hearing rumors, stories about a group operating out of an old abandoned farm near the edge of town. People say they've seen trucks coming and going at odd hours, and sometimes they hear barking. Jake chimed in. If those animals are being held there, we need to do something, but we can't just walk in without proof. That's where you come in, Charlie. Me? Charlie asked, startled. You're new to the team, Ethan explained. If someone's watching us, they won't recognize you yet. We think you might be able to check the place out without raising suspicion. The weight of the request hit Charlie hard, but she squared her shoulders, determination shining in her eyes. Tell me what I need to do. The next day, Charlie found herself driving down a dusty, isolated road leading toward the rumored farm. Tucker, the scrappy terrier who had slowly but surely warmed up to her, sat in the passenger seat. His sharp eyes darted around as though he sensed the tension in the air. The farm loomed into view, its broken fence and overgrown yard giving it an air of abandonment. Charlie parked her car a safe distance away and approached on foot, her heart pounding in her chest. As she got closer, faint sounds of barking reached her ears. She crouched behind a bush, her phone camera ready to capture any evidence. Peering through the foliage, she spotted a series of makeshift pens filled with dogs, many of them thin and terrified. Charlie's breath caught. This was it. Charlie's hands trembled as she zoomed in with her phone camera, carefully recording the pens and their terrified occupants. The dogs ranged from scrappy terriers to large breeds like German shepherds, all huddled together in the cramped, dirty enclosures. Their barks carried a mixture of fear and desperation, and the sight broke her heart. As she moved to get a better angle, a shadow passed in front of a nearby barn. Charlie froze, holding her breath. A man emerged, dragging a barking Labrador by a thick knotted rope. The dog resisted, digging its paws into the dirt, but the man yanked harshly, forcing it to stumble forward. Charlie bit her lip, suppressing the urge to shout. She couldn't blow her cover now. Instead, she continued filming, her chest tightening with every second she watched the man's rough treatment. Every second the cost livid, if not the people in her home. Just as she was about to retreat, a low growl emanated from behind her. Charlie turned her head slowly, her stomach dropping. A burly Rottweiler, its fur bristling, stood just a few feet away, its sharp eyes locked on her. "Easy," Charlie whispered, her voice barely audible. She raised her hands in a calming gesture, hoping to diffuse the situation. The Rottweiler growled again, stepping closer. Charlie's heart pounded, but before she could react, Tucker appeared at her side, standing protectively in front of her. Despite his small size, the terrier let out a sharp, assertive bark that startled the larger dog. The Rottweiler hesitated, its ears twitching, before letting out a low huff and retreating. Charlie exhaled shakily, her hand instinctively reaching down to pet Tucker. "Good boy," she murmured. Not wanting to press her luck, Charlie slipped back through the overgrown brush and returned to her car. She climbed inside, her hands still shaking as she started the engine. Tucker jumped into the passenger seat, wagging his tail as if to reassure her. Sally constantly wanted Tucker to come with her, but Jack stayed where he was, content to work while they waited. "We've got what we need," Charlie said aloud, more to herself than Tucker. "Let's get this to Ethan." Back at the sanctuary, Ethan and Sophia crowded around Charlie's phone as she replayed the footage. Jake paced the room, his hands balled into fists. "This is worse than I thought," Sophia said, her voice heavy with emotion. "Those poor animals." Ethan nodded grimly. "It's enough to go to the authorities. But we'll need more than just video to make a solid case. We need to identify the people involved and connect them to the disappearances.
Enough time.
Charlie felt a surge of frustration. What more do they need? It's obvious these dogs are being mistreated. Jake stopped pacing and leaned against the table. They'll claim it's just a holding area or that they're rescuing the dogs. We need something indisputable. Records, transactions, anything that ties this place to illegal activity, Sophia added. And we need to act fast. If they catch wind that we're onto them, they might move the animals or destroy evidence. Ethan's jaw tightened as he mulled over their next move. We'll need a plan. I'll pull some strings and see if we can get a private investigator involved. In the meantime, we keep documenting everything and gathering statements from people who've lost pets. Charlie glanced at Tucker, who sat by her feet, his expressive eyes filled with trust. The thought of those dogs trapped at the farm made her chest ache. Whatever it takes, she said firmly. We're not letting them get away with this. The next day, Charlie accompanied Sophia to a nearby neighborhood where several pets had gone missing. They knocked on doors, speaking with residents who shared heartbreaking stories of their beloved animals vanishing without a trace. At one house, a young boy with tear-streaked cheeks clutched a picture of his missing golden retriever, Buddy. "He never runs away," the boy said, his voice trembling. "He always comes back when I call him, but this time, he didn't." Charlie knelt down, her heart breaking. "We're going to do everything we can to find Buddy, okay?" she promised, her voice gentle but firm. As they walked back to the car, Sophia sighed. Every story is the same. It's like these animals just disappeared into thin air. "As you well know," said Polly, "some people never return." "They didn't disappear," Charlie said, her jaw tightening. "They were taken." Sophia nodded. "Then we need to bring them back." That evening, back at the sanctuary, Ethan gathered the team for an emergency meeting. "We've got one shot at this," he said, his tone serious. "We're going to hit them where it hurts, but it's going to take all of us working together." Charlie's resolve hardened. This was more than just a job. It was a fight for justice, and she was ready to see it through. The sanctuary buzzed with activity as Ethan's team prepared their next steps. Charlie, Sophia, Jake, and a small group of trusted volunteers worked late into the night, piecing together the evidence they had collected. Ethan stood at the center of the room, maps and documents spread across the table, his expression focused. "We need to act quickly," Ethan said, his voice steady but urgent. "The footage Charlie captured is compelling, but it's not enough. We need something that ties this operation directly to the missing pets and illegal sales." Jake leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "That means going back to the farm. We need to dig deeper, find records, transactions, anything that proves these guys are more than just animal hoarders." Sophia frowned. "And what if they catch us? Charlie was lucky the last time. Next time, they might not hesitate to use force." "Zero impact on the genome, if I may jest," Charlie added. Ethan met her gaze, his tone calm but firm. "That's a risk we have to take, but we'll be smart about it. No one goes in alone, and we have backup plans in place." Charlie, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "I'll go," she said firmly. Sophia turned to her, concern etched on her face. "Charlie, are you sure? You've already put yourself in enough danger." "I'm sure," Charlie replied, her voice steady. "I've seen what's happening there, and I can't just stand by. If I can help stop this, I will." Ethan nodded, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "All right, Charlie, Jake, and I will head to the farm tonight. Sophia, you stay here and coordinate with the local authorities. If anything goes wrong, we'll need someone on the outside to get help." That evening, under the cover of darkness, the three of them set out. Charlie sat in the passenger seat of Ethan's truck, her heart pounding as they approached the farm. Tucker was in the back seat, his sharp eyes scanning the landscape as though sensing the tension in the air. Jake, sitting in the back with Tucker, double-checked the equipment they had brought: flashlights, gloves, and a small camera for recording. "Remember," he said, his tone serious, "we're here to gather evidence, no heroics." Charlie nodded, gripping the edge of her seat as the farm came into view. The broken fence and overgrown yard were just as she remembered, but this time she noticed faint lights flickering in one of the barns. Ethan parked the truck a safe distance away, and the group moved silently through the brush, keeping low. Tucker padded beside Charlie, his ears perked and tail stiff as he stayed close to her side. When they reached the edge of the property, Ethan gestured for them to stop. "Jake and I will check out the barn," he whispered. "Charlie, stay here with Tucker. If anything happens, you call Sophia immediately." Charlie opened her mouth to argue but caught the warning look in Ethan's eyes. Reluctantly, she nodded. As Ethan and Jake crept toward the barn, Charlie crouched behind a cluster of bushes, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. Tucker sat alert beside her, his ears swiveling at every distant noise. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as Charlie watched the barn intently. The faint sound of muffled voices reached her ears, followed by the sharp yelp of a dog. Her stomach twisted, and she fought the urge to rush in, nipples pink as she watched for a dot. Suddenly, Tucker let out a low growl, his body tense. Charlie turned just in time to see a figure approaching from the side, their silhouette illuminated by the moonlight. Panic surged through her, but she forced herself to stay calm. She reached down to steady Tucker, whispering, "Stay quiet, boy." The figure stopped a few feet away, scanning the area as though looking for something. Or someone. Charlie held her breath, her heart hammering in her chest. Just as the figure took another step forward, a loud crash erupted from the barn. The figure whipped around, distracted by the commotion, and Charlie seized the moment. "Let's go, Tucker," she whispered, retreating deeper into the shadows. Tucker and Jack pondered. Back at the barn, Ethan and Jake found themselves face to face with two men blocking their path. The barn was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of hay and unwashed animals.
"This is private property,"
one of the men growled, stepping closer. "You're trespassing," I said. "We're not here to cause trouble," Ethan said calmly, raising his hands. "We just want to know what's going on with these animals." The second man smirked, pulling a metal pipe from behind his back. "You should have stayed out of this. Now you're gonna regret it." Jake clenched his fists, his muscles coiled like a spring. "Ethan, get the camera rolling. We're about to get all the evidence we need." Ethan didn't respond to Jake's face-to-face. He watched his father lead the way to his garage. The barn erupted into chaos as the two men lunged toward Ethan and Jake. The dim light cast long, flickering shadows on the wooden walls, amplifying the tension in the room. Jake sidestepped the first swing of the metal pipe, grabbing a nearby pitchfork to defend himself. Ethan, meanwhile, held up the camera, his focus locked on documenting every detail. "Get out of here," one of the men roared, swinging wildly. Jake ducked and thrust the blunt end of the pitchfork toward the man's stomach, forcing him to stumble back. "Not a chance," Jake growled, his tone steady despite the situation. "I did say science." In the commotion, Ethan's camera caught glimpses of the pens lining the barn's walls. Dogs cowered inside, their whimpers and barks blending into the cacophony. "We have everything we need," Ethan called out to Jake. "Let's move." But the men weren't giving up so easily. One of them lunged for Ethan, his hand reaching for the camera. Before he could make contact, a loud bark echoed from outside the barn, freezing everyone in place. Tucker. The small terrier burst through the barn door, his growls ferocious despite his size. Charlie followed close behind, her flashlight slicing through the dim air. "Stay back!" she shouted, her voice trembling but resolute. "Do," said slowly. The men exchanged a glance before retreating toward the back of the barn. "This isn't over," one of them spat before disappearing through a side door. A frosty breeze blew warmly through the night, causing both the four men to jerk back, chilled. The rest of the world slept on. Ethan let out a shaky breath and lowered the camera. "Good timing," he said, glancing at Charlie. She rushed to his side, her eyes darting around the barn. "Are you guys okay?" Jake nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "We're fine, thanks to Tucker." He crouched down to scratch the terrier behind the ears. "Good boy, buddy. You're fearless." Charlie's relief was short-lived as her gaze fell on the pens. "The dogs," she whispered, stepping closer. She crouched beside one of the enclosures, her flashlight revealing a trembling border collie with matted fur and wide, frightened eyes. "It's okay," Charlie murmured, her voice soft. She reached through the bars, her fingers brushing the dog's fur. "We're here to help." Ethan joined her, his expression grim. "We need to get them out of here, but we can't do it alone." Jake straightened up, his jaw tightening. "We call Sophia. She can get animal control involved." Ethan nodded, pulling out his phone. "And we'll need reinforcements. These guys aren't going to let us take these dogs without a fight." While Ethan made the call, Charlie and Jake began documenting the conditions inside the barn. Each pen told a heartbreaking story. Dogs with visible injuries, empty water bowls, and piles of uncleaned waste. Exercise. Charlie felt her anger rising with every step. "How could anyone do this?" she muttered. Jake placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "People like this don't see animals as living beings. To them, it's just profit." "Okay." Before Charlie could respond, Ethan returned, his phone still in hand. "Sophia's on her way with animal control, but we need to hold the fort until they get here. Can you two handle that?" Charlie and Jake exchanged a glance before nodding in unison. "We're not leaving until every dog in here is safe," Charlie said firmly. Minutes felt like hours as they waited. Charlie stayed close to Tucker, who sat by her side, his ears twitching at every distant sound. She kept her flashlight trained on the barn door, her nerves stretched, taut. Finally, the sound of tires crunching on gravel reached her ears. Red and blue lights flickered through the barn's cracks, and relief washed over her. "They're here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Animal control officers and sanctuary volunteers flooded the barn, their movements efficient and purposeful. Sophia led the charge, her expression a mix of determination and heartbreak as she assessed the situation. "Oh, Charlie," Sophia said, placing a hand on her arm. "You did it. You found them." Charlie shook her head. "We're just getting started. There's still more to uncover." As the last of the dogs were loaded into the animal control vehicles, Charlie stepped outside, the cool night air filling her lungs. She glanced at Tucker, who sat at her feet, his tail wagging faintly. "You're a hero, you know that?" she whispered, scratching behind his ears. Ethan and Jake joined her, their faces lit by the glow of the flashing lights. "We've taken a big step tonight," Ethan said, "but this is just the beginning. Those men, whoever they work for, they'll regroup." Charlie nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we'll be ready for them." The following morning, the sanctuary was buzzing with energy. Word of the rescue operation had spread quickly, and the community was rallying around Evergreen Rescue. Volunteers sorted through donated blankets and food, while others checked on the rescued dogs, ensuring they were hydrated, fed, and comfortable in their new surroundings. But amid the flurry of activity, a heavy sense of unease lingered. Ethan had gathered the core team, Charlie, Sophia, Jake, and a few trusted volunteers in the sanctuary's office. Maps and notes were spread across the table, alongside a laptop displaying stills from the video Charlie had captured at the barn. "This was a big win," Ethan began, his tone serious. "But we can't ignore the fact that it's just one piece of a larger operation. Those men we saw at the barn, they're not the ones in charge. We need to figure out who's pulling the strings." Sophia nodded, her arms crossed. "And we need to do it fast. If they realize we've exposed part of their operation, they'll either go underground or retaliate." Charlie glanced at the photos of the dogs on the screen, their scared, pleading eyes etched into her mind. "What do we know about the farm's owners?" Jake tapped a file on the table. "The property is registered under a shell company. It's a dead end on paper, but one of the men we encountered last night is connected to a name that keeps popping up in our research: Darren Colt." "Darren Colt," Ethan repeated, leaning back in his chair. "Why does that sound familiar?" "He's a known trafficker," Jake said grimly. "Animals, stolen goods, you name it. He's been arrested a few times, but always manages to dodge serious charges. If he's involved in this, it's bigger than we thought." "He called us to talk." Sophia exhaled sharply. "So what's the plan?" "We've already handed over the evidence from the barn to the authorities. Shouldn't they handle this now?" "They are handling it," Ethan replied. "But we all know how slow the system can be. We can't just sit around and wait for them to act. If Colt's the head of this operation, we need to find him, and fast." That evening, Charlie found herself back in Ethan's truck, this time heading toward the outskirts of a neighboring city. Jake had uncovered a lead, a warehouse that Colt allegedly used as a distribution hub. Ethan glanced at her as they pulled onto a deserted road. "You sure you're up for this?" Charlie nodded, determination hardening her expression. "If Colt's behind this, we need to stop him. Those dogs deserve justice." "I'll start working on it." The warehouse loomed ahead, its steel exterior dimly lit by a single flickering floodlight. Ethan parked a safe distance away, and the group, including Jake and Tucker, approached on foot. The area was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of machinery inside the building. As they crept closer, Charlie's stomach churned. Something about the silence felt wrong. Jake motioned for them to stop and pointed toward a side door. "That's our way in," he whispered. "Let's stick together." The whisper died. Charlie followed closely behind, her flashlight gripped tightly in her hand. Tucker stayed at her side, his tail stiff and ears alert. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil and metal. Rows of crates lined the walls, each marked with cryptic labels. The group moved cautiously, their footsteps barely making a sound on the concrete floor. Ethan gestured toward a cluster of cages near the back of the warehouse. "There," he whispered. Charlie's heart sank as she saw the dogs, at least a dozen of them crammed into tiny enclosures. Their fur was matted, and their eyes held the same mix of fear and resignation she'd seen at the barn. "We need to get them out of here," she murmured. But before they could move, a sharp voice rang out. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The group turned to see a tall man stepping out from the shadows, flanked by two others. His confident swagger and cold smile left no doubt in Charlie's mind. This was Darren Colt. "Well, well," Colt drawled, his voice laced with mockery. "Looks like we've got some animal lovers trespassing on private property. That's not very smart." Ethan stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. "We know what you're doing here, Colt. It's over." Colt chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, I don't think so. You see, I've got the law on my side. What do you have, a couple of bleeding hearts and a scrappy mutt?" Charlie clenched her fists, anger bubbling in her chest. "These animals deserve better than this," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We're not leaving without them." Colt's smile vanished, replaced by a menacing glare. "You've made a big mistake coming here. he growled, "and now you're gonna pay for it." As Colt signaled to his men, the room exploded into chaos. The tension in the warehouse was palpable as Colt's men moved to surround Ethan, Charlie, and Jake. Charlie's pulse quickened, but she refused to let fear control her. Tucker growled at the men, standing his ground beside her, his small body a beacon of bravery. Colt's men advanced, and Charlie's heart pounded in her chest. "This is our chance," she whispered to Ethan, trying to remain calm. "We need to get the dogs out." Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning the room, calculating their next move. "Jake, you take the back. Charlie, with me. We need to move fast." Jake didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the back of the warehouse, where another exit stood. Charlie and Ethan darted toward the cages, trying to act quickly without drawing attention to themselves. Colt's voice rang out, sharp and full of malice. "You think you can just walk in here and take what's mine?" Charlie grabbed the lock on one of the cages, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the key. She shot a glance at Ethan, who was looking through a stack of papers nearby. He was trying to find something, anything, that could tie Colt directly to the trafficking operation. But the men weren't about to let them leave easily. One of Colt's associates lunged toward Charlie, grabbing her arm and yanking her away from the cage.
"You're not going anywhere,"
he snarled. Charlie fought back, elbowing him in the ribs.
"Get off me!"
she shouted, adrenaline surging through her body. Tucker, ever the protector, leapt into action. With a swift bark, he sank his teeth into the man's ankle, causing him to shout in pain and release his grip on Charlie. The man kicked out at Tucker, but the terrier was quick, dodging the strike and retreating to Charlie's side. Ethan, seeing the distraction, moved swiftly, tackling one of the men to the ground. The other henchman raised a baton, aiming for Ethan's head, but Charlie reacted faster. She grabbed a loose pipe off the ground and swung it at the man's legs, knocking him off balance.
"Hit me!"
In the chaos, the sound of sirens wailed in the distance. The authorities were on their way, but they wouldn't get there in time unless they acted fast. "We need to go now," Ethan shouted, pulling Charlie toward the exit. Jake had already unlocked the back door, and the three of them, along with the terrified dogs, made a break for it. There was nowhere to hide, not in the house and not in the garage. As they dashed through the warehouse, Colt's voice echoed behind them. "You're making a huge mistake. You think you're going to get away with this?" Charlie didn't look back. She only focused on the dogs and their safety. The animals, many of whom were trembling and malnourished, followed them out into the cool night air. Outside, they ran toward the truck. Charlie could hear the sound of Colt's men chasing them, their heavy footsteps pounding on the concrete, but they were too slow. The team had made it to the truck just in time, and the engine roared to life as they slammed the doors shut. As they sped away, Charlie glanced over her shoulder. She could see the warehouse receding into the distance, but her mind was still on the dogs they had just rescued. She wasn't sure what Colt would do next, but she knew one thing for certain. They had to put an end to this. "We got them," Jake said, his voice tinged with relief. "We did," Charlie replied, her heart still racing. But as the adrenaline began to fade, the weight of the situation settled over her. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. As they reached the sanctuary, Sophia and the volunteers were already waiting, eager to help the rescued animals. The team rushed to unload the crates, checking each dog's condition. The sight of so many frightened, starved animals was heartbreaking, but Charlie felt a sense of accomplishment. These dogs were safe now, and that's all that mattered. "Good work," Sophia said, her voice soft with admiration as she approached Charlie. "You really came through for them." Charlie glanced at the dogs being unloaded, her heart swelling with pride. "We couldn't have done it without everyone here." But just as she was about to step back into the sanctuary, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Charlie pulled it out, her stomach tightening when she saw the caller ID. It was Ethan. "Charlie, we've got a problem." Ethan's voice crackled over the phone. "Colt's men are moving fast. They've got more people on the way, and they know we've taken the dogs." "What do you mean?" Charlie asked, panic rising in her chest. They know we're a threat now. We need to be prepared. Ethan warned. Get everyone inside and lock the doors. We'll meet you there. Charlie hung up, her mind racing. This was far from over. They had a long fight ahead of them, and Colt wasn't going to give up easily. Charlie's heart raced as she turned to Sophia. We need to lock down the sanctuary, she said, her voice firm but urgent. Ethan says Colt's men might be coming after us. Sophia's eyes widened, but she didn't hesitate. I'll get everyone inside. Let's move. The volunteers quickly sprang into action, herding the rescued dogs into the main building. The sanctuary's gates were closed, and heavy wooden beams were brought out to reinforce the entrances. Charlie helped set up a makeshift barricade at the front doors, her hands trembling but steady as she worked. Tucker stayed glued to her side, his sharp eyes scanning the yard as if he knew danger was coming. You're my little bodyguard, huh? She murmured, scratching his head briefly before focusing back on the task at hand. Minutes felt like hours as the team waited, their nerves stretched thin. The night was eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from the nervous whimpers of the dogs inside. Charlie stood by the window, her flashlight clutched tightly in her hand. Then, faintly, she heard it, the low rumble of engines. Someone's coming, she whispered, turning to Sophia and Jake, who were stationed nearby. Ethan's truck roared into view first, skidding to a halt in front of the sanctuary. He jumped out, his face set with grim determination. They're right behind me, he said. Get ready. Sure enough, headlights appeared on the horizon, growing closer with every passing second. 3 vehicles pulled into the dirt road leading to the sanctuary, their engines roaring like thunder. Well-masked, Olympic-sized troopers with pistols openly drawn. Colt's men were here. Gravity creeped back in his mind, and the first truck came to a stop just outside the gates. Colt stepped out, flanked by 2 of his henchmen, their silhouettes stark against the bright headlights. Well, look at this, Colt drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. A little fortress, huh? You really think some wooden beams are going to stop me? Charlie stepped forward, her fists clenched at her sides. You're not getting those dogs back, she said, her voice steady despite the fear knotting in her stomach. Colt laughed, shaking his head. You've got guts, kid, I'll give you that. But here's the thing. You've stolen from me, and I don't let that slide. Huh? Ethan joined Charlie at the gate, his voice calm but resolute. These animals aren't your property, Colt. You're abusing them, trafficking them. It ends here. Colt's smile twisted into a sneer. You think you're some kind of hero? This is business, and you just cost me a lot of money. With a snap of his fingers, his men moved toward the gate, tools in hand. They began cutting through the chain-linked fence, the sharp screech of metal sending a chill down Charlie's spine. The troops behind him on the road were also screeching, separating to access their tools. Get back inside, Ethan said to her, his voice low but commanding. Now. Charlie hesitated but nodded, retreating toward the main building. Inside, Sophia and the volunteers were waiting, their faces pale but determined. They're cutting through the fence, Charlie said. We need to be ready. The sanctuary erupted into chaos as Colt's men breached the fence. They moved quickly, scattering across the yard as they tried to force their way into the building. Jake and Ethan met them head-on, using anything they could find, brooms, shovels, even garden tools to fend them off. Inside, Charlie and Sophia worked to keep the dogs calm, while also keeping an eye on the windows and doors. The sound of breaking glass shattered the tension as one of Colt's men smashed a side window, reaching inside to unlock it. Not today, Charlie muttered, grabbing a fire extinguisher. As the man climbed through the window, she sprayed him directly in the face, sending him stumbling backward with a shout. Tucker barked ferociously, his small frame puffed up with determination. Charlie couldn't help but grin despite the chaos. Good job, buddy, she said, giving him a quick pat. Outside, Ethan and Jake managed to drive back several of the intruders, but the fight was far from over. Colt himself strode toward the main building, a crowbar in hand. "Come on out," he called, his tone dangerously calm. "Let's settle this." Charlie's heart pounded as she peeked through the door. Colt's gaze locked onto her and his smile widened. "There you are," he said. "You've been a thorn in my side long enough." Before she could respond, headlights flooded the yard as another vehicle roared into view, but this time it wasn't one of Colt's men. It was the police. The sound of sirens split the night as officers poured out of their vehicles, weapons drawn. "Hands in the air!" one of them shouted. Colt froze, his crowbar dropping to the ground. His men scattered, but the police were quick to apprehend them. Within minutes, the yard was filled with flashing lights and shouting as Colt and his crew were taken into custody. Charlie stepped outside, her knees weak with relief as she watched the scene unfold. Ethan approached her, a tired but triumphant smile on his face. "It's over," he said. Charlie nodded, her gaze shifting to Tucker, who sat by her feet, his tail wagging. "We did it," she murmured, kneeling down to hug him. "We actually did it." The sanctuary buzzed with subdued relief as the flashing red and blue lights of the police vehicles illuminated the yard. Colt and his men were now in handcuffs, their bravado replaced with grim silence as they were loaded into the back of squad cars. Charlie leaned against the door frame of the sanctuary, her body sagging with exhaustion. Tucker sat loyally by her side, his sharp eyes still alert even though the immediate danger had passed. Ethan approached her, a satisfied but weary look on his face. "The cops are taking them in," he said. "They've already started going through the evidence we collected. There should be enough to tie Colt to the trafficking ring." Charlie nodded, her gaze drifting to the dogs in the yard, now calm but still visibly shaken. "We saved them," she whispered. "But how many others are still out there?" Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "This isn't the end, Charlie, but it's a start. Thanks to you, we've taken a big step toward shutting these people down for good." As the police vehicles pulled away, the sanctuary's team began the long process of cleaning up. Broken glass littered the ground, and the fence would need serious repairs, but for now the focus was on the rescued animals. Sophia and Jake worked tirelessly alongside the volunteers, setting up temporary shelters for the dogs and ensuring they were warm and fed. Charlie joined them, her exhaustion forgotten as she knelt beside a trembling beagle. Erin stood up. "Hey, it's okay now," she murmured, her voice soothing. "You're safe." As they moved together, they noticed a searchlight coming through the bedroom window. The beagle licked her hand tentatively, its tail wagging ever so slightly. The small gesture brought a smile to Charlie's face, a reminder of why she had fought so hard. As the night stretched into early morning, the team gathered in the sanctuary's main room, sipping on hastily brewed coffee and sharing quiet moments of reflection. Ethan stood at the center, addressing everyone with a tone of quiet pride. "What we did tonight was dangerous," he began, his gaze sweeping across the room. "But it was worth it. We saved lives, both the animals we brought here and the ones that won't have to endure Colt's cruelty because of what we've exposed." Jake raised his mug in a toast. "To the sanctuary and to Charlie. None of this would have happened without her." Charlie felt a flush of embarrassment but smiled nonetheless. "It was all of us," she said. "We couldn't have done it alone. A traditional scientific study would have taken years, maybe decades." Just as the team began to relax, a sharp knock echoed through the room. Everyone froze, the earlier tension returning in an instant. Ethan moved cautiously to the door, peering through the peephole before opening it. To their surprise, it wasn't a threat. It was Detective Larson, the officer leading the investigation. "Sorry to disturb you so late," Larson said, stepping inside. "I wanted to update you on what we've found so far." Ethan gestured for him to sit, and the room fell silent as the detective began to speak.
"We've been going through Colt's records and it's worse than we thought," he said grimly. "The farm and the warehouse were just the tip of the iceberg. Colt was running a network that spanned multiple states, and we're still piecing together how many animals were involved."
Shane eyed his cigarette butt hesitantly on his cigar. Ethan saw a hint of worry in his eyes, but decided it was better to get that out front before he felt. Sophia's face paled. How could something like this go on for so long? Larson sighed. People like Colt operate in the shadows. They rely on secrecy and intimidation to keep their operations running. But thanks to your team's courage, we've got a solid case against him now. This could be the breakthrough we need to take down the entire network. Ethan leaned forward, his expression resolute. What do you need from us? Keep doing what you're doing, Larson replied. You've already done more than anyone could have asked. And stay vigilant. Colt's associates won't go down without a fight. If you notice anything unusual, call us immediately. Charlie nodded, her resolve hardening. We're not going to stop until they're all brought to justice. As the sun began to rise, casting golden light over the sanctuary, Charlie stepped outside for a moment of quiet. Tucker followed her, his small frame brushing against her leg as she gazed out at the peaceful yard. We did good, didn't we, boy? She whispered, kneeling to scratch behind his ears. Tucker barked softly, his tail wagging in agreement. The weight of the night's events still pressed on her shoulders, but Charlie knew this was just the beginning. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like they were making a difference. As she stood, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Ethan lit up the screen. Meeting tomorrow, we've got work to do. Charlie smiled. Bring it on, she murmured. The next day, the sanctuary was bustling with activity. Despite the exhaustion lingering from the previous night's confrontation, the team was focused and determined. News of Colt's arrest had begun to circulate, bringing a surge of attention to Evergreen Rescue. Local reporters arrived, their cameras capturing footage of the rescued dogs and interviewing the team. Charlie stood near one of the outdoor enclosures, brushing a trembling border collie's fur as a reporter approached her. You're one of the people who helped take down Darren Colt's operation, right? The reporter asked, holding out a microphone. Charlie hesitated, glancing at Ethan, who gave her a small nod of encouragement from across the yard. I was part of a team, she said humbly. This wasn't about any one person. It was about saving these animals and putting a stop to something terrible. The reporter smiled. What's next for you in the sanctuary? Charlie looked at the dogs in the enclosure, their tails wagging tentatively as volunteers worked to feed and care for them. We're going to keep doing what we've always done, giving these animals a second chance. And we'll keep fighting to make sure people like Colt can't hurt them again. The interview wrapped up and Charlie returned her focus to the collie, whose soft eyes reflected a growing trust. You're safe now, she whispered, her fingers working through the dog's tangled fur. Inside the sanctuary's office, Ethan, Jake, and Sophia were poring over the latest updates from Detective Larson. Ethan pointed to a map spread across the table, marked with red dots indicating Colt's known operations. Colt's arrest was a big win, but it's clear his network goes much deeper, Ethan said, his tone serious. Larson's team is already working on leads in other states, but there's something local we need to address first. Jake raised an eyebrow. What's that? Ethan tapped one of the red dots near their town. A smaller facility. Colt's operation used it as a drop-off point. It's abandoned now, but Larson thinks there could still be evidence there. Sophia frowned. Are you suggesting we check it out? Ethan nodded. The police are stretched thin. and Larson asked if we'd be willing to take a look. If we find anything solid, it could help connect Colt's associates to the larger network. Charlie, who had just entered the room, caught the tail end of the conversation. "When do we leave?" she asked, her voice steady. Ethan gave her a cautious look. "Charlie, after last night, you've already done more than enough." "I'm going," she interrupted firmly. "This isn't over yet. If we can help stop this for good, I'm in." Ethan sighed but nodded. "All right, we'll head out this afternoon. Jake, Charlie, you're with me. Sophia, you stay here and keep an eye on the sanctuary." Sophia didn't look pleased but nodded. "Just be careful. We can't afford to lose any of you." By mid-afternoon, the group was on the road again, heading toward the drop-off point. The abandoned facility sat on the edge of a dense forest, its rusted metal gates hanging loosely from their hinges. "This place gives me the creeps," Jake muttered, as they stepped out of the truck. Charlie glanced around, her senses on high alert. "Let's make this quick," she said, Tucker padding silently at her side. Shortly afterward, they reached the head of the stairs, leaving Charlie alone in the small basement. The group moved cautiously through the overgrown yard, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves in the wind. Inside the building, the air was stale, and the faint smell of urine lingered. Ethan held up a flashlight, illuminating rows of empty cages. "Looks like they cleared out in a hurry," he said. "I saw them on the way here." Charlie crouched beside a pile of papers scattered across the floor. She picked up a torn receipt, its faint ink showing the sale of a shipment to an unknown buyer. "This could be something," she said, handing it to Ethan. As they continued searching, Tucker began to bark, his small body stiff with tension. "What is it, boy?" Charlie asked, following his gaze toward a stack of crates in the corner. Jake moved ahead, prying open one of the crates with a crowbar. Inside were collars, tags, and leashes, some of them engraved with names. Charlie's stomach churned as she recognized a few from the missing pet reports they had gathered. "This proves it," Jake said, his voice grim. They were keeping trophies. Before they could react, the sound of tires crunching on gravel reached their ears. Ethan motioned for them to stay quiet as he peeked through a crack in the boarded-up window. "It's another truck," he whispered. "And it's not the police." Charlie's heart raced as she moved to his side. Outside, a black truck idled near the gates, and two men stepped out, their movements deliberate. One of them carried a heavy duffel bag, while the others scanned the area with a flashlight. "Colt's people," Jake muttered. "They're here to clean up." Ethan's jaw tightened. "We can't let them take anything. This evidence is too important." Charlie gripped her flashlight tightly, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "What's the plan?" Ethan took a deep breath, his expression resolute. "We split up. Jake and I will create a distraction. Charlie, you get Tucker and the evidence out of here, no matter what. Don't stop running." Charlie opened her mouth to argue, but stopped when she saw the determination in Ethan's eyes. She nodded. "Be careful." As Ethan and Jake moved toward the entrance, Charlie crouched low, clutching the receipts and papers to her chest. "Come on, Tucker," she whispered, glancing at her loyal terrier. "Let's get out of here." But as she made her way toward the back exit, the sound of footsteps echoed closer. The men were inside now, and escape wasn't going to be easy. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon when Charlie finally emerged from the dense forest surrounding the abandoned facility. Tucker stayed close by her side, his little legs moving swiftly as they navigated the uneven terrain. In her arms, Charlie clutched the bundle of receipts, photos, and collars they had recovered. The evidence was damning, and she knew it could be the key to shutting down Colt's entire network. Behind her, the faint sounds of shouting and scuffling from the facility reached her ears. She paused for a moment, her heart pounding as she glanced over her shoulder. "Ethan, Jake, please be okay."
she whispered. Tucker barked softly, as if urging her to keep moving. Charlie nodded and pressed on, her focus fixed on the truck they had parked on a side road just out of sight of the facility. When she reached the vehicle, Charlie placed the evidence carefully on the passenger seat and opened the back door for Tucker to jump in. She pulled out her phone and quickly dialed Sophia's number. "Charlie?" Sophia's voice came through, filled with concern. "What's happening? Are you safe?" "I've got the evidence," Charlie said, her voice shaky but determined. "But Ethan and Jake stayed behind to create a distraction. Colt's men are there. They need backup." Sophia's tone hardened. "I'll call Larson and get the police there immediately. Stay put, Charlie. Don't go back in." Charlie hesitated, her instincts pulling her in two directions. She wanted to help, but she knew that staying out of sight and protecting the evidence was the right call. "Okay," she said reluctantly. "Just hurry." 15 agonizing minutes passed before the sound of approaching sirens broke the silence. Charlie watched as police vehicles sped past her hiding spot, heading straight for the facility. Relief flooded her chest, but it was short-lived as her thoughts turned back to Ethan and Jake. Unable to sit still, Charlie decided to follow the police at a safe distance. She parked her truck along the edge of the facility's lot and crept closer on foot, keeping to the shadows. When she reached the scene, the sight that greeted her made her stomach churn. Colt's men were being rounded up by officers, their hands cuffed behind their backs. Nearby, Jake leaned against the hood of a patrol car, a shallow cut on his cheek but otherwise unharmed. Charlie's eyes darted around, searching desperately. "Where's Ethan?" she called out, her voice cracking. Jake turned toward her, his expression grim. Inside, he stayed back to make sure they didn't destroy anything. Before Charlie could respond, Detective Larson appeared, his face set in a hard line. "We're going in," he said, gesturing to a group of officers. "Stay here." "No way," Charlie shot back, stepping forward. "He's my friend. I'm coming with you." Larson hesitated, but the fire in Charlie's eyes convinced him. "Fine," he relented. "But stay behind us." "Aha!" As they entered the facility, Charlie's heart pounded with each step. The air inside was heavy, the metallic scent of blood mingling with the stale odor of decay. "Ethan," she called out, her voice echoing through the empty halls. "Back here," came a faint reply. Charlie's chest tightened with relief as she followed the sound. They found Ethan in one of the back rooms, crouched over a pile of documents. He looked up, a tired but triumphant smile on his face. "Got it," he said, holding up a ledger. "This ties Colt to every illegal sale he's made in the last year." Charlie ran to him, helping him to his feet. "You scared me half to death," she said, her voice shaky. "Why were you trying to escape from everyone?" Ethan chuckled weakly. "Couldn't let them win, could I?" With Ethan safely back on his feet, Charlie helped him out of the facility, the precious ledger clutched tightly in his hands. Detective Larson and his team moved quickly to secure the scene, collecting the remaining evidence and overseeing the transport of Colt's men to the station. Outside, the cool night air felt like a balm against Charlie's frayed nerves. Tucker ran up to meet her, his tail wagging furiously as he jumped into her arms. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, holding him close. "We're okay now." Ethan sank onto the tailgate of a nearby truck, letting out a long breath. "That was too close," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. Jake, sporting a makeshift bandage on his cheek, joined them with a bottle of water in hand. "Close but worth it," he said, passing the bottle to Ethan. "Between the ledger and the other documents we found, Colt's network is going to crumble." Somewhere inside Hilly's panicked mind was a warning. Charlie sat beside them, her gaze drifting to the facility behind them. "It's not just about Colt," she said quietly. "It's about every animal that's been hurt by people like him."
We can't let this happen again." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "And we won't," he said firmly. "This is the start of something bigger, Charlie. We've proven that even a small team can make a difference." Over the next few days, the fallout from Colt's arrest sent ripples through the community. News outlets covered the story extensively, shining a spotlight on the cruelty of his operation and the bravery of Evergreen Rescue. Donations poured in from people inspired by the sanctuary's work, providing much-needed funds to repair the facility and care for the rescued animals. Charlie found herself at the center of the attention, something she wasn't entirely comfortable with. Reporters sought her out for interviews, eager to hear her perspective on the events. Despite her initial hesitation, she agreed to speak, hoping to bring more awareness to the cause. "I'm not a hero," she said during one televised interview. "I'm just someone who saw something wrong and couldn't ignore it. These animals don't have a voice, so it's up to us to stand up for them. That's what this is really about, giving them a chance to live the lives they deserve." Back at the sanctuary, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The dogs rescued from the facility were slowly recovering, their personalities blossoming as they received love and care from the staff and volunteers. One morning, as Charlie was tending to Max, the scrappy terrier she had grown especially fond of, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. Max, who had once been so timid and fearful, now wagged his tail enthusiastically as she approached. "You've come a long way, haven't you?" Charlie said with a smile, scratching behind his ears. Sophia peered beside her, a clipboard in hand. "He has," she agreed. "And so have you." Charlie looked up, surprised. "Me?" Sophia nodded. "When you first came here, I could tell you were searching for something. Maybe a purpose, maybe a place where you belonged. I think you've found it." Charlie glanced around the sanctuary, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Yeah," she said softly, "I think I have." But the work was far from over. Ethan called a meeting that afternoon, laying out plans to collaborate with other sanctuaries and animal welfare organizations to track down the remnants of Colt's network. "This is just the beginning," he said, addressing the team. "We've shown what we're capable of, but there's still so much to do. Are you all in?" The room erupted in agreement, every member of the team ready to continue the fight. Charlie raised her hand, a determined smile on her face. "Let's do this." Weeks passed, and Evergreen Rescue Sanctuary transformed into a hub of hope and resilience. The once damaged fences had been repaired, new enclosures were built, and the sanctuary hummed with activity. Dogs that had once been too scared to leave their corners now ran freely in the open fields, their tails wagging with newfound joy. Charlie spent her days juggling tasks, working with the animals, coordinating with volunteers, and diving deeper into the mission that had become her life's purpose. The attention from Colt's case had brought more than just donations. It had sparked conversations about animal welfare throughout the community. One afternoon, Charlie sat beneath the shade of a large oak tree, Tucker curled up beside her. In her hands, she held a letter from a family who had recently adopted one of the rescued dogs. "Dear Evergreen team, we can't thank you enough for bringing Bella into our lives. She's the sweetest, most loving dog, and we can't imagine our home without her. We're so grateful for the work you do to save animals like her." Charlie smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She looked down at Tucker, who wagged his tail lazily, as if sensing her happiness. "We're doing good work, huh?" she said softly. Tucker barked in agreement, his small frame vibrating with enthusiasm. That evening, the sanctuary hosted a community event, a celebration of their progress, and an opportunity to share their vision for the future. Families with adopted pets arrived, their laughter and joy filling the air. Children played with the dogs in the open yard, while volunteers served refreshments and spoke about the sanctuary's mission. Charlie stood with Ethan and Sophia near a makeshift stage where Jake was sharing stories about the rescue operations.
It's amazing to see this place come alive like this, Sophia said, her voice tinged with emotion. It is, Charlie agreed. But there's still so much more to do. Ethan nodded. And we'll do it. Together, we'll return to our mission to bite the dark. As the evening wound down, Detective Larson arrived, his presence drawing attention. He approached Charlie, a small smile breaking through his usually stern demeanor. I thought you might like to know, he began. Colt's trial date has been set. With the evidence you helped uncover, there's no doubt he'll be convicted. He won't be hurting any more animals. Colt smiled. Charlie felt a surge of relief. That's the best news I've heard all day, she said. Larson handed her a small folder. There's one more thing. We've been tracking some of Colt's associates, and we found something interesting. A list of buyers from his operations. Some of them are local. Charlie's brow furrowed as she scanned the list. So, this isn't over yet? She murmured. Larson shook his head. No, but we're making progress. And thanks to you and your team, we've got a solid start. Later that night, as the sanctuary quieted down, Charlie sat by the outdoor fire pit, the folder from Larson resting on her lap. She stared into the flames, her mind turning over the possibilities of what lay ahead. Tucker hopped onto her lap, breaking her train of thought. Hey, you, she said, scratching behind his ears. Looks like we've got more work to do. Ethan appeared, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. He handed one to Charlie and sat beside her. Penny for your thoughts? He asked. Charlie smiled faintly. Just thinking about what's next. Colt might be behind bars, but there are still so many animals out there who need us. Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the fire. It's a big job, but if anyone can do it, it's this team. Charlie took a sip of her hot chocolate, feeling the warmth spread through her. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace, not because the fight was over, but because she knew they were making a difference. The morning after the celebration, the sanctuary was quiet. Most of the volunteers had gone home, and the dogs were peacefully dozing in their enclosures. Charlie sat at her desk in the office, reviewing adoption applications for some of the rescued animals. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Ethan. Meeting at noon. Big news. Charlie raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. She finished her work and headed to the meeting room, where Ethan, Sophia, and Jake were already waiting. Tucker trotted behind her, his tail wagging as he greeted everyone. Ethan stood as she entered, holding a stack of papers. Glad you're here, he said. We've been working on something, and I think it's time we talked about the next step. Sophia grinned, clearly in on the secret. Go ahead, Ethan. Tell her. Ethan placed the papers on the table and slid one toward Charlie. It was a proposal, an outline for a regional initiative to combat animal trafficking and expand rescue operations. This isn't just about Evergreen anymore, Ethan explained. We've been in touch with other sanctuaries, shelters, and law enforcement agencies. They've seen what we've done here, and they want to work with us. This proposal is the start of something much bigger. Charlie scanned the document, her heart pounding with excitement. The plan detailed a collaborative network to share resources, coordinate rescues, and educate the public on animal welfare. It was ambitious, but it was exactly what they needed. This is incredible, she said, looking up at Ethan. But how are we going to pull this off? Jake chuckled. With a lot of hard work and some stubborn determination, your specialties. Sophia added, We've already secured funding from some of the donors who supported the sanctuary. And, with the attention we've gotten from the Colt case, we have momentum on our side. Charlie felt a surge of pride and determination. Let's do it, she said, her voice steady. Let's make this happen. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The team worked tirelessly to establish the new network, traveling to meet with other organizations, hosting workshops, and building partnerships.
The project wasn't without its challenges, but each obstacle only strengthened their resolve. Back at Evergreen, life continued as usual. New animals arrived, and old ones found their forever homes. The sanctuary had become a beacon of hope, not just for the animals, but for the people who believed in their mission. One sunny afternoon, Charlie stood by the outdoor play area, watching as a group of recently adopted dogs romped through the grass. Tucker barked at her feet, clearly eager to join them. "Go on," she said with a laugh, nudging him toward the group. "You've earned it." As Tucker darted off, Ethan appeared beside her, a contented smile on his face. "You've come a long way, Charlie," he said. She glanced at him, her own smile softening. "We all have. I couldn't have done any of this without you guys." "Were there many?" Ethan nodded, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. "You know, I think this is just the beginning. There's a lot of work left to do, but seeing this, it makes it all worth it." Charlie followed his gaze, the warmth of the sun on her face. For the first time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be, doing work that mattered, surrounded by people who shared her passion. "We're not done yet," she said, a spark of determination in her voice. "But yeah, it's a good start." Ooh. And as the dogs played in the distance and the sanctuary buzzed with life, Charlie knew that their story, like the animals they saved, was far from over.